Hi, this is Linda G. Robert, your solution lady, your coach, and your teacher with just another short video. I woke up this morning thinking of when I was a child. You know, you might not know this about me, but when I was a young girl, around 10, 11, I was abused. Although at that time, I didn't call it abuse. I called it I was being taken advantage of. So then I was living at my grandparents' place and I was around 10. There were these older guys, and honestly, all I know is that they were older. They might have been 18, 19, maybe in their 20s. I don't really know. You know, when you're a kid, anybody who's 15 or 16 looks older, and you have no concept of age. Anyways, I do remember getting compliments, especially in French. They would say things like, "À qui tu care après 9 heures?" I had no idea what that meant. I was so shy, and I was so, you know, kid. I was a kid. I was a young girl. And, not only did I get compliments from these older boys, but my mother at the time, uh, and of course, this is only stuff that I know now about her. She was very lonely. She was lonely and she did seek a lot of attention from men. But I remember going to her place once because I was living with my grandparents. I was visiting with my mom, and she had invited these men over. And I remember her not being around this particular night. I think she was in a bedroom, the bedroom. And one of the older men was sitting beside me. We were just talking, and I don't remember what we were talking about. But then he asked me to put his hand over his pants. And of course it was in the penis area. He didn't he didn't ask me more than that, but he wanted me to touch that area. And I did. I did. He must have said something to say it's okay, it's not going to hurt or anything like that. I can't remember. I don't remember the details, but I do remember touching his penis over the pants. And I remember too that my mom might have been around that same time, brought me to a bar. Now, it wasn't a bar. It was, it was like uh, oh God, now I can't remember the name of it. It was where people would go dancing. I can't remember the name, and it's not important because I was underage. I was about 11 or 12. You clearly needed to be maybe even 21 at that time. But I went in there with my mom, and I do remember dancing with this man to this one song called Devotion. And I enjoyed dancing. I remember enjoying dancing. But this man came over to the house afterwards. And I think he started asking me some questions like how old I was. And I told him how old I was, 12 or 13. And he was shocked. He was shocked that I was that young. And I remember him leaving. I didn't know why. I didn't know why he left. I only thought about it afterwards. These kind of things happened to me when I was younger. Now, I know a lot of you have been abused, you've been neglected, and my story maybe doesn't compare to yours at all because there's so many different types of abuse, emotional abuse and physical abuse and sexual abuse. But all of that affects us. I know it affected me because I started associating that affection or that attention with love. My mom did that a few other times too. I remember this one time I was at my grandmother's place and I got a call from somebody. Now, my mom wasn't there, But I got a call from this guy saying that he wanted to meet me. And because my mom told him that I was cute. Okay. I, we did meet. But then I remember him saying to me, homely, but cute. I didn't really understand what that meant. All I remember is that we met, we probably talked, but that word homely but cute stuck with me for a long, long time. And I thought about it afterwards. I think my mother was actually trying to get me to feel loved. Or I don't know if she was thinking of prostituting me. I don't know if she was thinking that far. But in fact, what was happening was that I was being shaped. I was being shaped to associate certain behaviors with certain other behaviors. And at that time, my parents were just divorced, and I did not see my father. I did not see my father or feel any of the fatherly affections that one would normally get, nor did I get any affection, physical affection, from my mother. You know, the only person that I actually got affection from was my grandmother, and even then it was very, very limited. So I grew up um, almost like wanting that affection, which is really human nature. We all want affection, we all want attention when we're little children. And of course, that continues when we're older too. We just do it in different ways. Because I remember as I got older, not so much in my teens, because in my teens, there were different behaviors that came out. I was always a quiet one and shy, but when I was with my friends, certain friends, and there was alcohol around, wow, did I ever wake up. Now, I didn't become a drinker at that time, but I know that it affected me a great deal. So that when I got a little bit older, 18, 19, I would drink a little bit more, and I noticed that I was different. I definitely was different. Now, by that time, I was already playing around a little bit with sex, but not being too sexual. I remember I was still a virgin. I actually um, lost my virginity when I was 20. But every time somebody gave me some affection or attention, I liked it. I really liked it. And then, I remember being with somebody who really liked me. And we started dating. We started going out. I was 17 at the time. And then he started doing some really strange things like hurting himself. I remember he had a BB gun and he shot himself in the stomach in front of me. Uh, and I didn't really kind of react to that. I was still feeling the effects of his affection and not really knowing the difference between what was right and what was wrong. And I was 17. Now I know things have changed like big time, but then again, things haven't, right? So if somebody's been abused, any type of abuse or neglected, um, you're not going to be able to recognize the differences between right and wrong. Now you might have a sensation that something's wrong, but what usually happens is that we don't pay attention to that. We don't know what that thing is that tells us that things are wrong, but we don't pay attention because we think what we're doing is right. Now, this is the truth. We really do think what we're doing is right. Now, I remember this other time when I was in college, and I remember, of course, going to the bar, and this was a real bar. This was a bar in Sudbury where I grew up, and it was such a dive. There's a lot of people there, and there was some music going on, and I was there with my mother, and I was 21 at the time. And I remember her telling me, there's a cute guy over there. I bet you can't pick him up or you can't get him. And for some strange reason, I said, sure, I can. And I went over there and I started talking with him. Somehow I knew at that time how I could use my face or use my body or use my words to change someone's behavior, to manipulate them. We end up by spending the weekend together. And I remember, I think, I think I smoked marijuana at that point, and we had sex all weekend, and it felt really fun. But I really thought, oh, I'm in love. I really thought I was love. This was love. I ended up by missing a skiing trip that Sunday morning, which was only about $300, and I didn't even think about it more than that. But for some reason, I just couldn't pull myself away at 21 to go to this skiing trip that I had paid for because I wasn't in college, and this was during the spring break. Well, it ends up that this young man was a sick young man, and of course, I didn't recognize that at that time. At that time, I didn't know he had been abused. At that time, I didn't know that he had prostituted himself to men. I didn't know that. These are stories that came out as he and I started, going out together and hanging out. But he became very violent at times. He was very abusive. He he and I should say, because I defended myself. He and I would get into fights, physical fights. It was horrible, and um, he would emotionally abuse me too. He would tell me things that were very, very hurtful. I remember this one time, um, and I can't remember how it started, but I just remember him, pushing me, and I'm defending myself. I'm pushing him back, and we got to a point where we're struggling. He's pushing me and he's choking me, and we end up in a shower where the shower curtain fell, and it was a defense. I was defending myself, but it was still very, very violent. He did this a few times, and he was doing that, and at the same time, he was such a kind soul. And this was the part that was so confusing. I was so confused. I really didn't know, because he had such a good heart, especially when he didn't drink. You see, because he also used alcohol at 21. He used alcohol and he used pills at the time that changed him. And I was taking a course at the time. I was taking the child and youth worker course at the time, and I was learning all about psychology. And yeah, guess what? I really thought I could change him. I thought I could change him. So I was hanging around. I just continued seeing him. And I remember when this was probably 7 months after we started going out, and by that time, he had harmed himself maybe 2 or 3 times. He had cut his wrists. This one time in particular, I remember we had a fight, a really, really bad fight. And I took off. I left because I thought, this is it. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be doing this anymore. And I left. I remember getting a call after that from the hospital because he had cut himself so bad that it required hospitalizations. At that time, I was in a school placement, and I remember going to the hospital to see him, feeling that I had to see him because he told me that if I didn't, he would harm himself more. And I felt terribly guilty. I remember going to the hospital and seeing his arms in casts, and him telling me again that he needed me, and if he wasn't with me, he would kill himself. I believed him, and I stayed with him. I remember he then um, came to live at my mother's house, my mother's apartment with me. But just before moving, there was something that I needed to do. I needed to go back to the apartment. And it was horrible because I saw the apartment full of blood. It was awful. It smelled terrible. It was so gross, but I had to clean it. And then I left it after it was cleaned. And I never did go back to that place. And I continued seeing him. Now you're going to want to know the end of this story, so I have to tell you. Well, a few days. Um, this was after we were married. Yes, we got married. We got married at 7 months. Yeah, 7 months. We got married. Anyways, I won't get into that story, but this was a few months after we got married. He told me things. He told me some things like, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to hurt you. And he was so sincere when he said that. Because there were so many different things that happened that I'm not going to be spending time telling you this over this video. But so many things had happened. And just um, a few days before this one thing happened, he told me these things and he said to me, I don't want to hurt you. And I remember this one night he did say to me, if I don't come home, I want you to call the hospitals. So I went to work that night. I worked in a restaurant. Well, actually, it was a bowling alley. In the restaurant at the bowling alley. And I remember going home that night because that's what he had told me. And he wasn't home, so I called the hospital. And sure enough, the nurse told me to come to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, she brought me to a room. It was just a small room. She was there, and she told me that he had passed away. And I didn't know what that meant. I was kind of still in shock. But what she told me after, she said, he died. And I was still in shock. I didn't really get it. I was numb. I was really, really numb. And of course, I found out that he had died and that he had been identified uh, by someone. It was, in fact, his brother-in-law. So I'm telling you this story here to share some of my feelings of numbness, these feelings of guilt, these feelings of just not knowing. And of course, after this happened, there were many things that happened. After his death, I became very promiscuous. I just had sex with, well, I had sex with the pallbearer, and I had sex with all sorts of men, really. And at that time, I didn't really know what it was. But when I reflect back, it was really my way of masking those feelings. Just didn't want to feel. I didn't want to feel those feelings of unworthiness, those feelings of guilt, those feelings of shame, all of those feelings. I really didn't identify them. And later on, of course, in my life, I started drinking to mask feelings. And I eventually started abusing marijuana to mask feelings. Marijuana wasn't so much to mask feelings at the beginning. It was just for fun. I would be able to let go and be so free, and eventually it became more of a habit. It was to mask feelings. So why am I telling you this? Well, it isn't really about me, although, when we do tell our story, it feels good for sure. It helps to release. Sometimes journaling helps to release as well. And I wasn't talking about myself to release myself today. I've told my stories before, but in much different circles. I was telling you this because I've been doing videos for a long time for many different reasons. I do videos, but this one in particular was to reach you, whoever you are. You might be a young girl, you might be a young woman, you might be my age, and you're feeling these sensations of guilt and shame. And if this comes from guilt, if this comes from being abused, you have nothing. Nothing to be ashamed of, because like me, I didn't know. I confused sex with love. I really did think that this was love. It wasn't though, but I didn't know that at the time. I discovered that afterwards when I went for some counseling. So if you're being abused now, or if you were in the past, counseling is going to be helpful. Journaling is definitely going to be helpful. Sometimes you might need more help than counseling, depending on your circumstances. I had to go to a program many years ago. I chose to go to a program, I should say. I didn't have to go to a program. I went to a program because at that time I was abusing marijuana. I needed to take a break from work at that time. I went on a sick leave and I decided to register for this program. And in order to be acceptable to this program, you needed to abuse a certain substance, alcohol or drugs of some sort, and I was abusing marijuana. So I went away, and slowly but surely, I started really noticing things and paying attention to my behaviors. I had stopped drinking at that time, um, and I stopped using marijuana at that time as well. I haven't touched marijuana now for many, many years. I drink on occasion. My friends would say I'm a social drinker, and believe me, I am. I hardly touch alcohol. Um, but sometimes some other behaviors creep up. When you try to mask feelings, um, it's not just with drugs, right? It might be with people, with places, with things. And I find myself sometimes eating at night. Now I'm not picking out, I'm not binging, but I am still eating, and that's a habit. I think I've shared that in another video that I associate with loneliness, but it's not always loneliness. It might be masking other sensations as well. So if you find yourself doing things that you don't really want to be doing, but you do them because you don't understand them, um, who knows why? Well, there are many different reasons why, but it's worth exploring. It's definitely worth exploring with a professional, a therapist, a counselor. Friends help, but friends may not have the techniques required um, to make you feel comfortable and safe and help you, you know, think about or reflect on what could be happening. Friends are really helpful, though. I don't want to be saying don't talk to your friends, but I think in a lot of cases, it's therapists and maybe sometimes even psychiatrists and psychologists that could help you. I do suggest you start with that because I'll tell you, you might be afraid of going to see a psychologist because you think it's only associated with people who are crazy. Well, believe me, it's not. Because I'm not crazy. I was confused. I didn't know what these sensations were. And at that time, when I was abused, I didn't call it abuse, but in fact, it was. And it was helpful to put a name to it. So going through therapy will help you because you might put names through behaviors. I mean, you might start to understand that you are a very precious person, and that when we're young, our behaviors are shaped very easily. And sometimes we do things for attention and for affection, things that we need, but we don't always look for them the right places. I should have had affection and attention from my parents, from my father, from my mother, but I didn't. I simply didn't. I got neglect from my mother. From my father, I hardly saw him, and I didn't get affection from him. So I didn't know what affection, what real affection from people who love you was, because I never felt it once in a while from my grandmother. So it's confusing, right? So if you go to a counselor, oftentimes it's because maybe your relationships aren't working out and you don't understand it. Perhaps you're continuing to go out with men, or sometimes it's women too, of course, partners that are abusing you, and you don't want that, but you continue and you don't really understand why. Counseling really, really does help. Now, of course, if you're being abused now, I do advise you to be safe. Make sure you're in a safe environment, that you have a plan, that you do reach out to someone, but remain safe. And when it's only safe to do so, that you do go to a home, to a place where you can be in safety, so that you could gradually start your life ever so gently. And if you do go back to the person who's abused you, know that it's okay. It's what we do to protect ourselves, right? I remember, like I was never, uh, well, no, when I was 21, I was abused. He was choking me. I went back because I still loved him. I did. I really did love him. And I was 21. I didn't really know any different, but I didn't go back because um, I was afraid. I went back because I loved him, and I did think that he would change. Now, when I stayed with him, um, sometimes it was out of fear, sometimes it was out of guilt. You know, when he told me that he would hurt himself, I didn't want that. But I didn't know that I could just walk away from that without necessarily feeling that pain or knowing how to manage that pain. They need help. They need help, and we're not the ones to help them. They need some professional help too. So all of that to say, boy, that was a long video. I think it was my longest video. All of that to say that life can be absolutely wonderful, especially when you do get the help. You can laugh, you can hang out with friends that are there, that care about you, that will show you some affection and attention. You can eventually start dating people that will show you that affection and attention. You'll learn how to differentiate. You'll learn to trust again. This is true. You will learn to trust again. Men and women, of course, because it's not just we trust those that abuse us. Sometimes we lose trust in everybody, but you will. You will. Get the help you need if that's what you need. Start journaling now. Get those things out now, and do get some help if that's you. All right. And you can get more information about me on my website, www.lindagrobert.com. Now, I don't necessarily counsel people who've been abused. I offer coaching, but not therapy. And that requires something a little bit different. I'm educated, but I'm not a therapist. I'm a coach, and I'm a teacher, and I'm here to support you while you're getting the required help that you need. That's for sure. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. There'll be more videos. They're not always like this. They're about lessons learned. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye now.